People talk. If you're not nice to Hospital A, the guy across the town or Hospital B will hear about it.
Yeah, I was in Sapporo for 4 weeks. I went to the Sapporo Heart Institute and spent a bit of time there. I mean, people are very, very polite. There's English is still, but thank God for technology and Google Translate, so that's really helped.
I think one of my former fellows, Kotani, is involved with Sapporo Heart.
Oh, okay.
And I remember doing live cases in Japan where the whole case is in Japanese, and I'm standing there in the lab wearing red, and somebody sticks a microphone in my face and says, "Dr. Mintz, what do you think?" And I have no idea what
do you say to that?
You say something that sounds intelligent and you think applies to what was done, and you realize that they don't necessarily are looking for you to be brilliant. They want you to acknowledge who they are and the work that they do. And by just trying to say something intelligent, you acknowledge all of that. You show them respect.
Respect. We come back to respect again.
Yeah.
You strike me as somebody extremely calm and very grounded. How? No?
I can have a temper. Okay. TCT is great because I'm tired.
So this is one question I usually ask at the end of the podcast. There are young people watching us who might not be in medicine, who might have dreams of their own to set up a business, to develop a new design or an idea. From your very rich experience, what advice would you give those young people?
It's easier to take risks when you're younger. And you have to be willing to work hard and try to identify mentors who are willing to help you. You'd be surprised how many senior people, academics, non-academics, love to work with younger people as long as the relationship is mutually respectful and beneficial.
Yeah.
But the younger people are often afraid to ask, and the ones that ask tend to be a pain in the butt. There's a fine line where asking and being respectful and being willing to listen and being willing to be mentored and to learn, and respecting the time of the individual, and you can work together to develop that. So I think it's having a good idea, taking a little bit of risks, particularly when you're young, willing to work hard, I mean really hard. Nobody out there, doesn't matter if they're a great athlete or a great pop singer, they work really hard if they're successful. And if they're not successful, they either have no talent or they don't work hard. And then find good mentoring.
That was going to be my last question, but one last question. Who would you say has been your one mentor?
Oh my. So there have been a couple.
Having a one-to-one conversation with pioneers in any walks of life is a true blessing and a privilege because it allows one to delve deep into the very mindset, the very mentality that sets them apart from others. Professor Gary Mintz is someone I admire very much. He is a world-renowned cardiologist and the chief medical advisor at the CRF, the Cardiovascular Research Foundation. He is widely regarded as one of the pioneers of intravascular imaging. For those who are not familiar, this involves using a small catheter inside the coronary vessels, the arteries, to look at the morphology of the vessels, how much calcium there is, and decide how best to optimize the result with the stent implantation, so the metal spring that we put in to unblock arteries. In today's episode of Heart Life Rhythm, Professor Mintz takes us through his wonderful journey in intravascular imaging. He tells us how he was initially met with a lot of skepticism from the community. He also discusses hot topics such as burnout amongst doctors, as well as how to stay relevant and how to ensure longevity in any career. I have to say I was pretty nervous before meeting him, but he very quickly put me at ease with his sheer humility and his very relatable stories that he shared with us today. This episode will not disappoint, so sit back, relax, and take it all in. So a very warm welcome, Prof Gary Mintz, to our podcast, Heart Life Rhythm. I'm super thrilled to have you. We are celebrating 35 years of the TCT this year, which is a very special event. You've been a director of TCT for many years now. What is your recollection of that very first meeting in, I think it was 1988?
I was not at the very first.
Okay.
My first participation in TCT was either 89 or 90.
Right.
And I was not yet part of CRF. And I was working in Philadelphia, and I was presenting some data on laser angioplasty in the periphery. My number one recollection was that there was an ice storm.
Oh, really?
And getting from Philadelphia to Washington was not so easy. That was my number one recollection.
I imagine between that 1989 and 2023, this year, there has been quite a lot of changes. What's the most striking change or development that you've seen in those 35 years?
Are you speaking about the field, or are you speaking about the TCT?
The TCT.
The first TCT had only 200 participants.
Right.
It was a small meeting. By conventional standards, it would probably be one of the smallest meetings in our field.
Right.
The evolution of TCT was in literally every possible direction. As interventional cardiology evolved to include endovascular and structural heart disease, as it evolved to include primary PCI, as it incorporated new devices clinically, as stents became the default strategy, and then we had to deal with in-stent restenosis. At every evolution of interventional cardiology clinical practice, TCT has kept up, if not outpaced, that evolution, because it recognizes that the field is constantly evolving, and in order to remain current to both the academic and clinical interventional cardiologists, it had to expand to incorporate all the changes that happen on an annual basis. On top of which, interventional cardiology became an international specialty. It started off not, but now it's international specialty. We have people from all over the world. In 1991, I believe, we transmitted the first live cases from Italy and Japan to TCT. Now that is a common event where we see cases from all over the world and get to learn techniques from our colleagues, as well as see devices and equipment that might not be available to individual practitioners.
Is there any particular memory in all these years that stands out to you, that is something you forever remember or cherish?
The first time we did live cases from abroad by satellite, nobody had ever done it before. It was a huge risk. We're a bunch of doctors working with vendors that do satellite transmission. Imagine how crazy that is. And it turned out to be a spectacular success.
Wow.
That's not the only one, but that was kind of formative, and it pushed meetings like TCT in a totally new direction.
And I have to say, sometimes we, the new generation, we take all these live reconstructions for granted a little bit. You don't realize the process.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have had more than our share of misadventures and tragedies. There have been 2 hurricanes, 9/11, government shutdown,
Yeah.
and now the war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
All during TCT.
We are living in very uncertain times, I think, in this generation. I'll move on because I think the war and everything there's a lot to be said, but probably not on this platform, unless you've got something.
No, I'd just like to maybe point out, TCT started on 9/11. We had 2,500 people already in Washington. They could not leave. So we put on a very abbreviated TCT for our colleagues who were stuck in D.C. There were a group of interventionalists from Europe whose plane was diverted to Newfoundland.
Oh.
And there's a musical called Come From Away that is written about the people on flights that were diverted to Newfoundland and how they were accommodated and hospitality and so on. And there's a scene of a bunch of cardiologists.
Oh, wow.
So TCT contributed to at least one highly successful Broadway musical.
That is fantastic. I had no idea about this. That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So you're widely regarded as one of the pioneers, or if the pioneer of intravascular imaging. And for the non-medical or non-cardiologists out there, we now have access to special catheters with probes that allow us to visualize inside of the coronary vessel, to be able to see the morphology, to see how well our stent, so the metal spring, expands, in order to optimize our result and give patients a longer lasting result. And it's been shown in numerous trials now, some of which very important, which you've led, that using intravascular imaging results in less adverse cardiac events in patients. In 2023, as operators, what do you think is one thing we're doing well in terms of intravascular imaging and one thing that needs to improve?
What needs to be improved is education, hands down. The interventional cardiology fellows in training know that they have to learn intravascular imaging, but they have a hard time learning it because many of them are in programs that don't teach it. Their superiors or cath lab directors are uncomfortable with it and therefore do not provide an environment for them to learn. And that's a huge failure because if you don't learn something during your fellowship, it's hard to learn it afterwards. And I've been a strong advocate for education on multiple levels. It tends to happen in fits and starts. There's enthusiasm and then it stops. We've done surveys of how well interventional cardiologists think that, or fellows think they're being trained, and we're talking about less than 20% feel adequate training. What we're doing well is slow, organic adoption of the technology and ignoring the guidelines. The guidelines are unacceptable to call imaging a class 2 indication. So when you see a country like the UK, where half of left main intervention is imaging guided, and they publish a 34% annual mortality, that's phenomenal. And that kind of happened organically. Maybe there's some behind-the-scenes politics I don't know, but it happened organically. The clinical trials that have been done recently are finally well-designed. We have now data showing mortality benefit from intravascular imaging guided stent implantation. So that is, I think, is something that we've finally done well. But the educational hurdle, it's still there.
Still there. What do you think the solution would be? Would it be like simulation training for those?
Well, you can't learn imaging of any kind without looking at images. So I think that there are ways to design some very focused courses or podcasts or webinars where people get to use a lot of imaging. But that's not a replacement for doing cases in the cath lab.
Absolutely.
And I think every interventional cardiology fellowship should include some dedicated time to intravascular imaging during which the fellow doesn't worry about stents and guiding catheters and wires, but only focuses on the images. And by being able to do that, you can jumpstart the learning experience.
Absolutely. So I'm a fellow at the moment, and as part of the training in that region, so we have various hospitals coming for once fortnightly or once monthly meeting where we present interesting OCT cases and then discuss and learn a lot from each other. And there's always somebody very experienced moderating the whole thing. So I think that could be one way, maybe.
Yes, and it's done occasionally. Somebody's enthusiastic and then it falls apart. But that doesn't work unless you take it back to the cath lab.
True.
Unless you see how it integrates with the procedure itself, it's one step removed. And I'll tell you a simple, true anecdote. CRF has had imaging fellows now for many, many, many years. We've trained 45 in China alone. They come and they cannot do PCI because they're not credentialed in the US. And their bosses tell them, why are you doing this? You'll forget everything you know about PCI. So they come to the cath lab in Columbia, for example, and for a year they do no PCI except they focus on imaging and how it relates to the procedure itself. And they go back home and the boss turns to them and say, how come you're so much better than you were before?
Wow.
Because you learn a different perspective. It's not just learning imaging. It's learning what you're doing to the coronary arteries, what coronary atherosclerosis looks like, how it responds to intervention, and so on. So it really needs to be a fundamental part of the fellowship.
You've had an incredibly rich career. You've authored thousands of papers in peer-reviewed journals. You've led trials. You've taught at different congresses. In this journey of yours, what challenges have you faced, if any, or has it been relatively smooth?
No, there have been several challenges. My background before CRF was both as an echocardiographer and an interventional cardiologist.
Oh, okay.
So when I came to CRF actually on a sabbatical, I was able to speak the language of the interventionalist, but I also could read the images. And I was very lucky, and don't underestimate the value of luck, in that my colleagues at the Washington Hospital Center, Marty Leon, Kenny Kent, Lowell Sattler, Gus Bouchard, Jeff Papa, were welcoming and were willing to listen. And they understood the limitations of the tools that they had. And they said, okay, Gary, what can you tell us that would help us? And so we created databases, we hired technicians, we did all the stuff that we've done in echocardiography 15 years previously, and applied it to interventional cardiology. Now, I would show cases and people would laugh. Just like my early days doing 2D echo, people would laugh. I once gave a talk on 2D echo and somebody said, why are you wasting your time?
Oh my gosh.
Okay? The uptake in intravascular imaging has been incredibly slow. There are a lot of very senior people who denigrate the technology, don't believe that they need it, don't believe what they're seeing, and the resistance has been huge. Obviously, they're losing, but they're still there. A little bit of perseverance seemed to have helped. I tend to be slightly arrogant when I think I'm right, and I keep plugging away. And I've had tremendous support from many people. And little by little, people recognize that it really should be the standard of care.
So there is a growing number of young, not only cardiologists, but physicians that have been experiencing burnout. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on this, and what do you think is the secret to true longevity and sustainability of a career in quite a different environment? As you said, we've spoken geopolitically, things are different. There's a lot of mental health issues going on. It's not just cardiology or intervention or technique. There are so many factors that interplay. I was just intrigued to know what you think about all this.
I'm not so sure that I have an answer. But I can tell you that my career has been sustained and enhanced by being very varied.
Okay.
So when I was working in Philadelphia, I ran an echo lab and I was a business interventionalist. And I did some writing, but I was clearly clinically focused, and I was also focused on university administration.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I joined CRF, I was given protected time, if you will. Something I never had in a university.
Okay.
At a private foundation, I'm given protected time. Just do a good job and write papers and like that. And then the work got noticed, and I was invited to travel internationally.
Okay.
And today, I can honestly say that no 2 days in a row are the same. Some days are more academic, some days are more administrative, some days I'm working on slides for talks, some days I'm doing webinars. Not doing the same thing over and over, I think, is one key. The second key is to do something you really like. People go into various fields of medicine for lots of reasons, not always because it's the field that they really like.
That's true.
And I think that's a mistake. Because the world changes around you, but if you like cardiology, the heart's not going away. And if you like orthopedics, bones and joints are not going to go away. So I think starting with a career that you, or in a field that you really like, and if you make a mistake, recognize it and do a mid-course correction. I mean, I've had colleagues who started off rheumatology and then decided that they really didn't like it, so they became cardiologists and eventually cardiologists. Not easy, I admit it, but doable. And try to do things that are different. We talk about reinventing yourself. Well, maybe a break in working for industry is not a bad idea. Maybe trying to get a sabbatical is not a bad idea. I mean, you take some risks, you take some financial hits, but it could be enough to reinvigorate your career. I mean, that's what happened to me. I was an echocardiographer, interventional cardiologist. I had a sabbatical. I went to CRF. They said, Gary, you have the background in both imaging and intervention. Why don't you play with this thing called intravascular ultrasound? The machines are sitting here. They gave me support, and it took off. And I have to recognize Jeff Popma because he came about the same time, and he put together the first database. So the first interventional cardiology database was done in the 1990s. He read the angiograms, I read the IVUS, the research nurses did all the clinical chart review and clinical follow-up, and we could almost within a year start publishing papers on 1,000 patients, making definitive statements. I took that as an opportunity and I said, I'm not going to waste it. I'm not going to do a sabbatical, put my feet up and, think of it as a long vacation. I mean, I was in the hospital nights, weekends, reading the IVUS studies, entering things into the database because I recognized the opportunity for what it was. And granted, that was a long time ago now. It's 30 years, maybe more. But it kept my career interesting and fresh. And then the success that I had at CRF led to many other things, whether it's working with industry, whether it's traveling. I've lectured in 40, 50 countries. I've been to China 100 times.
And you've worked very closely with the teams in Korea and Japan and...
Absolutely. These are my colleagues. These are my friends. I've been welcomed into their homes. I don't do a lot of sightseeing, but I see how they work. I see how their culture evolves. I've learned a little bit how to communicate with Asians and realize that every Asian country is different and you can't lump them all together. That spawns other things. We've got research projects that come and go. Sometimes I'm very active with people in Korea or Japan, sometimes not. And then all of a sudden China and India pop up. These are great.
Do you need any special skills to be able to, I mean, it's such a huge network, as you said, different culture, different communication styles. What are those skills that you think have stood you in good?
Respect them as individuals, physicians, respect their culture, and don't do it for yourself. So I know many Americans who go and they want to work with an institution, and all of a sudden everything that they do is theirs. I won't do that. I won't take credit for anybody else. If they want my help, happy to do it. Obviously, if the paper is written, I'd like my name on the paper. That's a given. But I do not demand the credit for the work that they do, which most people do the opposite. And if you don't try to undermine them, if you don't try to take credit for what somebody else does, they're more likely to invite you
And
trust you a second or a third time. And people talk, you know?
Yeah.
People talk. You know, if you're not nice to Hospital A, the guy across the town in Hospital B will hear about it.
That's true. That's a very different perspective.
No, I mean,
no one's mentioned this perspective to you before.
Be grateful for the opportunity, as I am. I mean, how many interventional cardiologists have been to China 100 times, Japan 100 times, Korea 100 times? Seen the evolution of each of those countries over 20 to 25 years. China from bicycles to clunky cars to European cars, back to bicycles and now electric cars. I mean, I've seen this firsthand. You know, Korea through the IMF years when the economy was tanked, and you saw projects on the horizon that were frozen in time for 10 years. My first trip to Japan in 1992, there was no English.
No.
Zero English. If I needed to use the restroom, somebody had to take me because otherwise I'd be lost. Of course, it's different now.
Yeah, I was in Sapporo for 4 weeks. I went to the Sapporo Heart Institute and spent a bit of time there. I mean, people are very, very polite. There's English is still, but thank God for technology and Google Translate, so that's really helped.
I think one of my former fellows, Kotani, is involved with the Sapporo Heart.
Oh, okay.
You know, and I remember doing live cases in Japan where the whole case is in Japanese. And I'm standing there in the lab wearing lead, and somebody sticks a microphone in my face and says, "Dr. Mintz, what do you think?" And I have no idea
what do you say to that?
You say something that sounds intelligent and you think applies to what was done, and you realize that they don't necessarily are looking for you to be brilliant. They want you to acknowledge who they are and the work that they do.
Right.
And by just trying to say something intelligent, you acknowledge all of that. You show them respect.
Respect. We come back to respect again.
Yeah.
You strike me as somebody extremely calm and very grounded. How? No? I
can have a temper. Okay. TCT is great because I'm tired.
I see. It's less of heightened...
But I've learned that although sometimes getting angry is necessary and helpful, but it doesn't usually accomplish very well.
How important are hobbies in kind of balancing your life? For me, it's dance. Dance grounds me.
I'm very visually oriented in many ways. I love black and white photography. Okay. My idols were the great black and white photographers of the mid-20th century.
Right.
I do black and white photography. I posted on a website.
Wow.
And until just recently, it was all film-based. Now, I don't develop my own, but the camera was an old film camera. And these days, going through security in an airport with film, when the guys inspecting your bags have no idea what film looks like, can be an interesting experience. But I love black and white photography. I collect it as well. In the summer, I like to garden. Again, it's very visual. And I find it very relaxing. I say it's like better than therapy to go out there and pull every weed in sight. And during the pandemic, I started to cook more.
Okay.
And I actually got, I think, pretty good.
You're pretty good?
Yeah.
Any favorite, I know we're digressing a bit, but that's interesting too. Any, what's your specialty?
I cook fish a lot, very different ways. So for example, I will oven roast whole fish, one small whole fish per person.
Yeah.
So a beautiful presentation of a whole fish, as long as they're not afraid of the bones.
Yeah.
I like to incorporate some spices. I like to incorporate Korean gochujang.
Oh, yes.
Because it has a depth of pepper flavor.
Yeah.
I like making shakshuka, which is a Middle Eastern, an Israeli dish.
Yeah, I've had it before.
And I've had, the classic is shakshuka with eggs, but I make shakshuka with fish, cod, embedded in the...
All right, okay.
And that becomes a delightful dinner.
Wow.
So there's no one specialty. Like in medicine, if I do it, it has to be done well. And if I cook something and it's a failure, I might try it a second time, and it's a failure, never again.
Oh.
But if it's a success, then just like doing a procedure over and over again, as long as I can make it perfectly every time, it doesn't matter where it comes from, what the cuisine is. I describe it as the same mentality as being, a doctor.
It's so refreshing to see somebody who's as multifaceted as this. It's quite rare. I think a lot of people get just focused on one thing or two. So thanks for sharing that. Where do you see the future of cardiology in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I'm not good at that. People ask me all the time, and I people say, well, how did you know that, that imaging was going to be successful? And I said, I didn't. I just, got lucky. People talk a lot about AI. There are opportunities for AI, but I'm not sure it'll replace the creativity of the mind. But it's another tool.
Yeah.
I think imaging of all kinds will continue to be important. There are evolutions in CTA, there are evolutions in PET scanning.
Yeah.
And each of the technologies will at some point hit a wall. Whether it's a temporary wall or permanent wall, they will hit a wall. And that's when software development and AI can sort of kick in. I think that the trend in cardiology to minimally invasive, catheter-based approaches will continue. I mean, the structural heart interventionalists doing things I never thought would be possible.
That's true.
Never thought would be possible. And so, I think there'll be a growth. I think that primary prevention, if it's done properly, will start knocking down the event rates. Because we see that fewer patients come in the U.S. with STEMI than used to come with STEMI.
That's true.
Because they're on long-term statins and so on. I think other countries are going to surpass us. China has already surpassed us in the number of PCIs.
Okay.
India will surpass China in the number of PCIs.
Okay.
And cardiology as an international specialty will continue to expand. I think that the success of this TCT is a testament to the international nature of the field. Remember, pandemic, COVID was just 2 years ago, and people were predicting that in-person meetings would never happen again. Everything could be done online. Well, nothing is further from the truth. I think there's a place for online meetings. I Zoom into the Columbia Cath conference because otherwise I wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
But people come because people have to network. People have to discuss ideas. You can stand around with somebody, a friend you haven't seen for a year and talk for 5 or 10 minutes and have a couple of ideas. Let's do this together. That never happened on a Zoom call.
Yeah, that's true. Actually.
I'm very bullish on cardiology, interventional cardiology, both domestically and internationally, both scientifically and clinically and academically. And I also want to give a shout out to the engineers. We're nothing without the engineers. I mean, think of what they have developed. Think of a TAVR. Are you crazy? A mesh stent that is both rigid and flexible at the same time. An imaging device that has a a resolution of 10 microns in the coronary arteries. I mean, just think about the stuff that they come up with and work with us to give us better tools to take care of our patients.
That is so true. I had the opportunity to interview Professor Cribier and the beautiful journey of Tarine, how engineers were pivotal, and a pivotal role in all this. It's incredible. So this is one question I usually ask at the end of the podcast. There are young people watching us who might not be in medicine, who might have dreams of their own to set up a business, to develop a new design or an idea. From your very rich experience, what advice would you give those young people?
It's easier to take risks when you're younger. And you have to be willing to work hard and try to identify mentors who are willing to help you. You'd be surprised how many senior people, academics, non-academics, love to work with younger people as long as the relationship is mutually respectful and beneficial.
Yeah.
But the younger people are often afraid to ask, and the ones that ask tend to be a pain in the butt. There's a fine line where asking and being respectful and being willing to listen and being willing to be mentored and to learn, and respecting the time of the individual, and you can work together to develop that. So I think it's having a good idea, taking a little bit of risks, particularly when you're young, willing to work hard, I mean really hard. Nobody out there, doesn't matter if they're a great athlete or a great pop singer, they work really hard if they're successful. And if they're not successful, they either have no talent or they don't work hard. And then find good mentoring.
That was going to be my last question, but one last question. Who would you say has been your one mentor?
Oh my. So there have been a couple. Going way, 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 way back when I was a medical student. You wouldn't think of these as mentors. I had an elective that I spent in the cath lab. There were 3 cardiology fellows in the cath lab at that time, in any one month. And I was like their pet. Let's go see the patients for tomorrow. Let's listen to them. Let's talk about them. And they're sort of nameless and faceless, but they were clear mentors. And then we had a very, very aggressive cardiology program where I went to medical school called Hahnemann. And there are a whole list of names that people may or may not remember. A guy named Joe Linhart was chief of cardiology. A guy named Chuck Bemis was director of the cath lab. William Lykoff, who was one of the founders of the ACC, had the biggest cardiology practice in Philadelphia, was president of the hospital. And he recruited Morris Kotler, who was one of the early echocardiographers, and they worked together. So that's when I got my first 2D echo machine in 1977, a while ago. And then when I moved to Washington, again, Marty Leon, Kenny Kent, Lowell Sattler, and Gus Bouchard were colleagues / mentors.
Okay.
I mean, in the fact, they were colleagues, we were kind of at the same academic level, but they were also mentors in helping me to establish what has become intravascular imaging as a specialty. And, colleagues can be mentors as well.
Could be a two-way traffic as well.
Absolutely.
We've reached the end of this podcast. I think I could have gone on talking to you, but you have a busy schedule. I appreciate greatly your time and your very valuable sharings with us. And I hope maybe we can get you back on this podcast to talk about other things at some point in the future. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and I hope some of the people listening don't get too bored. And
Not at all. Not at all. I'm sure they would have really enjoyed listening to your sharings.
Thank you.
So thank you.